So hello, I'm Christine. I'm an alumna from the class of 2015 college engineering, and I work at the Lincoln Lab. So I just want to talk a little bit about the Lincoln Lab before I get started. MIT Lincoln Laboratory is a federally funded research and development center. So we do contracts for the Department of Defense and other government agencies. Our overall mission is technology in support of national security, but then there's other mission areas depending on what division you're in. We have 10 different divisions, and my division is cybersecurity. And then within each of those divisions, there's individual specialty groups. My specialty group is cybersecurity assessments, and we focus on malware analysis, reverse engineering, and system exploitation. So I'm going to pass it over to Sukie to tell you more about cybersecurity and what she does at PwC.
Thanks, Christine. So I'm Sukie Mukhopadhyay. I'm a manager out of our PwC Cybersecurity and Privacy practice based out of Philadelphia. And like Carolyn said, also a Villanova alumni. So I class of 2011 computer engineering. So very excited to be back here. And just from a personal perspective, very into the empowerment of women and women in STEM fields. So absolutely honored to be presenting here today. A quick little bit about my background. So over the past 5 to 6 years, kind of working in this field, as well as started off with doing a lot of penetration assessments and then moving on to doing more security strategy and actually working with a Fortune 50 client to develop and kind of stand up their credit card compliance program. So that's sort of where my specialties lie. Moving on, so before we kind of go further into it, I do want to go through the agenda so everyone sort of knows where we're headed, and then we'll go through each of it. So first of all, I'm going to start with kind of a little bit of my as well as our perspective on cybersecurity and privacy, and then move that into kind of how the landscape is changing and how the focus on cybersecurity is changing as the business landscape changes. So we'll touch on some of those trends, some of the findings from surveys that PwC does, as well as then moving into one of the biggest attack vectors, which is through web applications, web vulnerabilities. So Christine will take us through a live demo of 2 attacks. So exciting with the live demo. Hopefully everything will work out, and then I'll take you through some of the mitigating controls of those attacks, and then lastly we'll touch on the broader strategy of how to prevent them in a more proactive way versus reactive way. So we do have a packed schedule, and I think we're 45 minutes, so we'll try to keep all the Q&A for the end, unless you really have a burning question that you're dying to ask. So starting here, I'm actually going to go through very quickly with the definition of cybersecurity and privacy, and I did not memorize this. So cybersecurity is the state of being protected against the criminal or unauthorized use of electronic data, or the measures taken to achieve this. And privacy is the state or condition of being free from being observed or disturbed by other people. So if you look at the definition, it's pretty broad. It can mean a lot of things. I mean, there's many ways to protect yourself from a criminal. There's also many different things that you may want to protect from the criminal, right? So what PwC does is kind of working with our clients to truly understand what is it that matters to them. What is the data? What is those assets that they want to protect, which if they lost would put their company out of business. So once we understand that, we kind of then help them strategize and figure out what is the best way to protect those assets, what are the tools to implement, kind of how do we get there, as well as what is the business risk that they're willing to accept. Any business that operates is going to operate with a level of risk, right? So you're not going to have the perfect Fort Knox. From a healthcare perspective, that data could be your patient records, social security numbers. If you're an insurance provider, maybe your insurance rates or how you calculate it. It could be your medical devices, like your pacemakers. These are all connected devices, right? So, and protecting is just a piece of the puzzle here. So we're seeing a trend or moving towards cybersecurity not just being the protection, but also how do we create value through it. So cybersecurity is moving from just being the problem or addressing the problem to actually being the solution now. So what do I mean by that, right? So going with kind of a healthcare example here, Fitbit. So Fitbit recently on their website kind of said that they're HIPAA compliant. HIPAA compliance is a healthcare-related regulatory compliance with a pretty big focus on security and data privacy. So as they say that, what they're saying to their customers that your data, when you use this device, is secure with us, right? And that's one piece of their assurance and part of their marketing strategy. So cybersecurity is now part of that business strategy that is being advertised to customers. The second piece of it is them being HIPAA compliant also allows them new revenue streams. So they can now work with doctors if they want to include Fitbit into the wellness plans that's being recommended. Or they can use the data that they're gathering from their customers and do analytics on them and potentially monetize that data. Right? So again, cyber being that business play now that we see. So moving on, as the business landscape is changing, as customers are demanding it, it's also changing the risk landscape, right? So risk isn't staying the same here. You now have companies that are being interconnected. So before, a company was really kind of its own ecosystem and then maybe one or two vendors. Now you have a slew of vendors and suppliers that they're connected to, and you're also now starting to get connected to customers. So with kind of the buzzword of the season, you have Internet of Things, and that's really kind of causing your customers to start being connected to you. And why is that risky? The more complex your environment is, your network is, you're going to have more attack surfaces. And by, I think, definition, the more complex something is, the harder it is to manage. So the more loopholes you may potentially have. Right? And we kind of see this with the data that's up there, and that's specific to healthcare. 13% more incidents that were detected in that industry. And for medium-sized payers and providers, it actually doubled. And I think part of that is probably that they actually now starting to care about security and have better tools to detect it, right? I don't think incidents just all went up. But part of it is also that the healthcare industry is and continues to be a target because of the boatload of sensitive data that they have and keep, right? So kind of with these, there are 4 big trends that we're seeing, right? And this is not healthcare specific, but definitely plays into it as well. So the first one there is cyber and privacy as a business issue. So businesses, as they're trying to innovate, and sometimes honestly just trying to stay in business, security is starting to have a seat at the table. So boards are starting to care about it, C-suite are starting to care about it. They're starting to see cyber as part of their enterprise risk management, and not just this kind of IT back office that is. So an example of that is, for example, mergers and acquisitions. The company that you're acquiring, cyber is a part of that valuation of the value of the company, right? The risk that you are owning. A very timely example is the Yahoo and Verizon deal. So I think the Yahoo and Verizon deal is actually getting delayed because SEC is doing investigation on the last 2 breaches that happened on Yahoo. And their investigation, whatever that report comes out, is for sure going to have some level of impact on that deal and the value of that deal, right? So moving on to the next one there, digital disruption. I think we touched on this a little bit, but customers really are starting to expect that digital intuitive experience, but then they also want you to protect and secure their data, right? And maintain their privacy. So that demand is now being driven by the customer side. So we want to make sure that cyber is a discussion when these applications or these products are being developed up front versus, the app has already gone out and gone live and now we're dealing with how the data was handled, which is a lot harder to do. Changing regulations. So the regulations that existed, even HIPAA for that matter, you have credit card compliance, they're actually becoming more stringent. So they are understanding that this is a requirement and they are putting more, they're enforcing it more. And then you also have new regulations that are coming into the view. So you have your EU data privacy, which is pretty stringent, actually kind of changing the landscape for a lot of global companies now. So again, moving from it being kind of optional to more of a table stake must-have. right? And then the last one there, value chain and collaboration and info sharing, it's really, so there's a customer piece to it, but there's also the business piece to it. So businesses in themselves are evolving to make, to kind of take advantage of efficiencies, collaboration, right? I think in a lot of companies you have teams and employees kind of collaborating through cloud technologies with their vendors, their contractors, developers, kind of all slew of that coming together on one platform. And again, now you're giving access to your data or your code to many, many different people. So now you need to figure out data governance around that. Third parties continue to be one of the highest cited sources of incidents and compromise. I think from our survey it was about 41%, so very high. So I guess from a healthcare perspective, now shifting, what are they doing, or right, where are they at? So Global State of Information Security Survey is a survey that PwC does in collaboration with CIO and CSO magazine every year. And this year we had 10,000 respondents from C-suite, including your security IT directors and chief information security officers. So pretty broad range globally that we do this survey. And all of this data is out of that, and every number is specific to healthcare, payer, and provider. So it's a specific cut of that. So here, you do see the change, right? So the healthcare companies are realizing that they need to spend and invest more in security. So the spending is going up. And a key driver for that, I'm going to say, is digitization. You're going to have like IoT things that they're doing. So they're starting to focus on, I think some of their key drivers are actually looking at medical devices, looking at cloud innovation, looking at how can we collaborate more within the businesses, right? So, and then the next big one that's a kind of a finding or a trend, if you will, is cloud. So cloud used to be this like the scary devil for the security world, and it's now changing. It's not. It's actually starting to be one of those things that's going to, I think, help us keep up. With everything moving so fast and happening, kind of moving towards digitization, what cloud is allowing us in the security world is actually the platform to do a lot of data analytics and threat intelligence, which is powered to be much faster than if you did through some of those traditional tools. So companies are starting to kind of see that to defend and innovate even in security to defend themselves, right? And then you have your companies are also starting to collaborate with each other. So companies are starting to realize that, hey, if I talk to my competitors about the threats that they're facing and share that information, we may be stronger together because we're probably seeing the similar attacks, so let's be more proactive and share that information. So all in all, I think there's definitely risk is increasing, but I think there is more awareness, and with boards starting to care about it, it's going in the right direction finally. So we'll kind of shift gears a little bit into Christine's piece, where we'll go through kind of two of the most common web vulnerability attacks and do a live demo and a deep dive there. So off to you.
So like Sukie mentioned, many doctors today are starting to get more involved with using web applications and switching over from their traditional methods of relaying patient data. For example, instead of calling you with test results, instead they'll give you some kind of login information for a platform, and then you log in and get your test results that way. And usually strictly physician-patient data is pretty on par with all the HIPAA compliance rules. They have a lot of strict regulations that they follow. But some of these other applications that are not strictly physician-patient data don't right away start with those compliance regulations, and they don't necessarily know what they need to be doing. For example, if you've ever used Fitbit or MyFitnessPal or a water tracker, all of that information you're volunteering, and you might not necessarily know if these companies are following HIPAA compliance or not, and there could be a possibility that you're leaving your data vulnerable without actually knowing, as the user, are they handling this properly, are they following the regulations, because you don't necessarily think that how much water you drink in a day is related to your health. So another thing that's really important to realize is that web applications are probably one of the most targeted vectors when it comes to cybersecurity, and this is because web applications require a high degree of availability and reliability. So a company is going to do everything that they can to try and make sure that their server's up and running, regardless of whether you're a malicious user or a benign user. And that's because all they care about is it up, is it running, is it there when the patient needs it, is it there when the person needs it. So that's something important to realize, and that's why people try to target them as much as possible, because they know that it's always going to be available, and if they attack it, it won't just get shut down. So if you want to make your web applications more secure, you need to start thinking about best practices. And a good way to approach best practices in defense is to think like an attacker. So thinking like an attacker, you have to do research into existing vulnerabilities and see what other attackers do. And I recommend looking at some of the really famous cybersecurity blogs like FireEye and Bruce Schneier. They tend to give information on the latest and greatest attacks, so that's a good way to see what's going on and have somebody explain it to you. For web applications in particular, there's the Open Web Application Security Project, and they actually publish a list of top 10 vulnerabilities every 30 years or so to let people know what attackers are doing usually. This doesn't cover all of the types of attacks, but these are the most common ones. And they separate it into two different categories: server attacks and client attacks. And so today I'm going to go over two types of attacks, and the first attack is going to be a server-side attack. So when I say server-side attack in healthcare arena, that means either like a hospital database that holds your information or your Fitbit database. So that would be like an enterprise database. And so the server itself is what's being attacked. And so the attack that I'm going to go over is the Heartbleed bug. Many of you probably heard about this. It was pretty popular. So popular, in fact, that they made comics about it. But the Heartbleed exploitation is using buffer overread to actually exploit a memory leak. And so the reason why it's called Heartbleed is because it exploits a heartbeat communication in an OpenSSL server. And so a heartbeat in OpenSSL is just a communication message where the user sends information to the server, and then the server echoes that data back to the client. So in this example, it spells it out really nicely. So as the client, you can say, here's my data, and here's the length. However, the server doesn't do any bounds checking, so it doesn't check to make sure that the length of your data that you're sending is actually the length that you said it was. So a benign user up top said, okay, sending you the word bird, and it's 4 bytes long. Please send me back 4 bytes. And so you send bird, and you get back bird. But this malicious user, maybe a black hat user, sends the word hat to the server, and instead of saying that it's only 3 bytes long, they say, I want 500 bytes back. So the server will echo 500 bytes back to you. And over here you can see, you do get the word hat, but then you get all this other data. So you might be wondering, what is this other data? This data is coming from adjacent memory, so when you send the information to the server, they hold your data in memory, and then anything that's near your information is getting leaked out. This is an example of one of the worst case scenarios where it's leaking your private key. And that would be your private key for encryption. So that is that any of your encrypted communications are actually now able to be read by the attacker because they just leaked your private key. Some other information that's contained in memories, things like usernames and passwords, maybe emails, things that you don't want an attacker to have, and if they do get it, then they're able to persist onto your database. Something that's important to know is with Heartbleed, they don't always get information. They won't guarantee that they're leaking your encryption key or passwords because it really depends on the layout of the heap. So memory is different every single time, depends on the memory of the server. Something that's important also to know is even though if they leak memory, it won't guarantee that there's bad output. A heartbeat communication can be 16,000 bytes large, so that means that they can just continually send messages because there's no limit on how many heartbeat communications you can send. So they can just keep trying your server until they get something, which is really bad, and which is why this was such a famous exploit. So I wanted to show you how to think like attackers and do this yourself. I just want to start off by saying you cannot test any attacks on any server that you do not own, which is why I'm showing you how to set it up yourself. So I actually have this all set up on my computer, but I wanted to explain kind of the steps of setting it up, just so you know. And my slides will be open, so you can follow these steps and try it on your own. First, you clone the OpenSSL repository, and then you can actually go to a certain branch of the repository that has a vulnerable version of the server. So you download that onto your computer, you follow these instructions to build it, and then you just run the server. And when you're running it, you should be able to log into a browser, localhost, which means your computer, not anyone else's, and you can see private information in your server. So this is information that if any of you tried to connect to my computer, you would not be able to see. But me, as a server owner, I can see it. And this is the type of information that would be hidden in memory that an attacker is trying to leak. So there's also, for your use, different attack scripts that other people on the internet have written to exploit the Heartbleed vulnerability. And so I adapted this one, but I just wanted to kind of explain before I run it so you know what's happening in the background. So this is a handshake, so it sets up the OpenSSL communication in the transport layer. And then this is the actual heartbeat communication that we're sending. And so I wanted to point out these last 2 bytes, 4000, means I want the server to send me 16,000 bytes back. So I'm going, in my demo, I'm sending my name, but then it's going to dump 16,000 bytes of memory. And my name's only 9 letters, so I'm sending way more than that. So now here, hopefully the server is still running. Okay, cool. Server's still running here. All right, and then there it is. All right, cool. So I'm just running the Heartbleed script. And all right, so it accepted my packet. And this looks really weird because it's received heartbeat response with the payload size. So I gave it the payload size that I wanted. And I said, send me back this much data, but I only sent my name, Christine. And so it did print my name, but then there's all this like weird random stuff. And this is like what memory looks like. Memory is not something usually coherent. It's usually just random bits, and it's coming from the heap, so it looks weird. But then I was able to leak some information, like they can tell what I'm running my server on, and then they have some like encoding information, and then what I really want as the attacker, a master key. So now I can read all the private encrypted messages on the server, which is bad. So that's why they hacked me. So I have a slide that kind of shows this. So it's a little easier to see. So I ran the script, and then it said received heartbeat response to the payload, and the local host is vulnerable. And so the original script, it has this check in place where it has the type and length of the payload, and then it returns this type. That means that it's vulnerable, and that's something that the person that wrote the code had. But I modified the script to make it actually print the payload because I was like, I want to see what's in memory. So I really encourage you to go online and try to do this yourself. Now Sukie's going to talk about how we can protect against this.
Sure, thanks. So before I start with the protection, I do want to highlight that this is kind of problematic because it's very hard to detect. When this attack happens, you can't necessarily tell that it happened because that heartbeat check is what's supposed to happen. So really, companies kind of have to assume that if they had OpenSSL, that attack might have happened or the data might have been compromised. So on the, a lot of companies maybe on the back end found out that their sensitive data was gone or passwords were leaked. So it's more the after effect that tells you that something bad might have happened. But the other piece that makes it critical is that not everyone, but like a large majority were likely affected by this. OpenSSL is one of the most popular open source cryptographic library that there is, and TLS uses that. And by TLS, you kind of like when you have your HTTPS, right, encrypting that traffic and that transmission is how that happens. And I recently actually read an article where it said that there are still 200,000 services that are still affected by this, and this came out in 2014. So just the scale of it and being able to fix it takes time. So the way we did the mitigations is kind of breaking it up into two parts. One is more relevant to you as a web user, as a consumer, and then the second is for companies, right? Now the for you may or may not be so relevant now. I think a lot of this happened when it came out, and a lot of companies communicated this up front. But in essence, what you would have done is gone to check, the websites that you use most frequently, like your Gmail, your Facebook, your bank, web applications, and using any tool, there's many tools available, you can check if it was vulnerable to it. And if it was, you would almost kind of wait to make sure that it was fixed before changing your password. So a lot of people kind of went and changed their password, but unless it's fixed, your password's just going to go out again, right? It doesn't really matter that you do it or not. So once it's fixed, you change your password, make sure that it's strong, and we have to say that, typically for your key services that you use have different passwords. You can manage it through a password manager, right? I mean, you can. I have a password manager. And then second of all is making sure that wherever that you can use two-factor authentication, you do. So for example, Gmail offers it, Facebook offers it, a lot of the banking sites offer it. And what that simply is that when I enter my password into Gmail, it sends me a code via text to my phone, and unless I enter that code, I can't log on to my Gmail. Right, so it's just that additional layer of security that if somebody has your password, they can't really go much further, right? From a company perspective now, you want to make sure that kind of go through your network and figure out like what are those services that were impacted by this, and then kind of go through the process of upgrading them to, I guess, a non-vulnerable version of OpenSSL, which is this 1.01G or higher. While you're at it, we also recommend that you upgrade your TLS to version 1.2 or higher. Not related to Heartbleed, but TLS had a number of vulnerabilities on its own, so while you're kind of fixing that area, you might as well and go forward. And you want to reissue any security certificates that you may have created through that service, because if that was vulnerable, that may have been compromised. You want to change all of your admin passwords. So you want to do all of that housekeeping again to make sure everything's back up and safe again. Okay. Back to you for the second demo.
So the next thing I'm going to go over is a client-side attack. And so some of you might have heard of cross-site scripting, which is a certain type of client-side attack that either involves website graffiti or some unintended rendering that the person who made the website didn't want. And so a client can either be you or me, a doctor, a nurse, anybody that's using a web application. So I'm going to go over something called cross-site request forgery, which instead of an unintended rendering of a web page, HTML, it's an unintended rendering of an actual request. And so this exploits the design of session tokens. So in your browser, when you're on a banking website, the old way they used to design session tokens was that it would actually implicitly trust your entire browser. So you as the user on the site could log into your bank, and then you open multiple tabs, and everything that you're doing on this website is implicitly trusted, so you don't have to continue to log in multiple times. So in this example, let's say you're logged into your bank, and the bank has a certain URL that commits a request to the website, and then it does something. So in this example, it says we want to transfer funds. So it has this thing that says transfer funds to give the account number and the amount. So cross-site request forgery is where another website can actually issue a request while you're logged in without you knowing. And so that's exploiting the session token. So if you're logged into your bank and then you go into another website, they issue this request. And so you might be thinking, well, how can they issue a request? Like, I would see the URL, I would see what's going on. And the way that they do that is by hiding it in the HTML source code. So, for example, this, if you notice, says image source. And so let's say you're on Facebook. When you go on Facebook, it doesn't just automatically load all of the pictures. Sometimes it's like take a while and you see that it's spinning. And that's because it's sourcing these images from maybe other websites, especially ads. If you look at your traffic, you'll actually see that you're not just on Facebook. You're on like ad site number 1, ad site number 2, ad site number 3, all being processed by your HTML server or HTML web page, and it's unintelligently parsing every single image. So if you're on a malicious website and they think, oh, I think this person's logged into a bank, then they'll hide this source code in their page, and the page will unintelligently parse that and then commit this request without you even knowing. What would most likely happen is on your page, if it's an image source, you'd get just like a question mark and you'd think, oh, that's weird, the picture didn't load. So here's an example visually of what's happening. So a person logs into their bank, and then they get this session ID, and that says, okay, implicitly trust this browser for this session. And then you go on some blog that you don't really know about, but you got a link from a friend or something. And that blog post has a malicious script, and they have this URL embedded somewhere in their page. Well, that script will run automatically and send this request without you knowing. So in this example, they just sent $20,000 to an account that, no. So if you are like on your credit card website, on your banking website, and it says like, oh, your session has ended, like we are logging you out, please close all tabs, that's because of cross-site request forgery. They want you not only to not have the session token valid for an unlimited period of time, but they're like, just X everything out in case, just in case something happens. So here's an example that I'm going to show you how to do this on your own. It's a little more benign. It's not a banking website, but this is Google Gruyere, and it's actually an entire host of tutorials from Google that talks about web application hacking. So it's really cool because there's 2 ways to do it legally so that it belongs to you. One way is they tell you how to download everything so you can host it locally on your machine. So like right now I'm hosting locally all of my demos so I'm not connected to the internet. But if you don't want to host it locally on your machine, you can actually create an account on Google Gruyere and log into the website. And if you look like over here, there's this number, and that's your individual number that they assign to you as the user, and then you can just do all of the hacking on this app. So it's really cool. It's really nice. Let's look at that. So in this example, I'm going to show how to delete something from somebody else's account using a malicious web link. So the way to figure out how to do this is you find out first how to delete something called a snippet. Google Gruyere is like, this application is like a posting platform, so you make an account and then you just post it. It's like a blog. And so here there's something called a snippet, which is your blog post, and this is the command to delete a blog post. And if you view the source, you can see that that's what this X button does. So I'm going to show you what my Google Gruyere application, let me just make sure my server is running. Okay, it's still running. All right, good. So this is my application, and I tried to make it more healthcare related to go with the theme. And there's 2 accounts here. So first there's this bad person account, and then there's my account. And so I'm logged in as me right now, and this bad person actually, this has a malicious link in it. So if I click on it, it's going to delete my snippet. So now if I go home again, see this changed, and I only have 1 snippet now, and it's like, how did that happen? What happened? I didn't even notice it happened. It happened so fast. So, all right, so I'm gonna do it, and I'll show you how this bad person actually did it. So first, here is a snippet, just so there's something there. And then I'm going to sign out, and I am the bad person, so I can log in as the bad person and show you what they did. So in their profile, that homepage link is, you can put any link in there. It doesn't check to make sure it's a real website. So they actually just put this command in. So remember where we had that image source equals like that malicious path? That's what this person did. So they're hiding so that every single person that clicks on their homepage will actually have this malicious command executed. And so if I sign in as me again, and let's say I'm a little bit smarter of a web user and I don't just trust every single link, I can actually look at that If I inspect this source here, oh, it's not rendering. Okay, well, if you do source edit, I don't know why this isn't working, tech, but it would show that malicious link here. But yeah, so here's my snippet, and then I'm gonna go home again, so I'm gonna click on this, and you saw that the home page was where that malicious link was, and then it deletes it. And so I see that it's happening again, and so if I click on it again, it'll just continually delete all of my things until I'm not even on the blog anymore. The person deleted all of my blog posts. So that's a much less serious type of bad thing that could happen with cross-site request forgery. Oh, did you guys see any of that?
It just went to black.
Okay, good. All right, yeah, so that's not as bad thing that could happen, but not as bad as stealing $20,000, but it's just a simple example. So go on Google Creator and try it out. They have tons of other tools too.
So kind of the mitigation here, right? So this attack, the main piece of it is that there is that implicit trust. So you want to take away that trust. And by that, basically what you want to do is for each of your session, you want to create a unique token for yourself, right? So it knows it's just your session and nobody else can pretend to be you or take over it. So in this scenario, basically what you want to do is generate a token for the session for the user, and then you also kind of create within a hidden variable for each of the forms, you create another token. Right? So when the user submits a request, basically what the server is doing is taking that session token and comparing it with the hidden token. So making sure that every request that is coming through is from that one session versus somewhere else. So if it doesn't match that check, it's basically going to reject it. So in that sense, kind of using that Bank of MIT example again, without that token, what you have is just whatever the account number, the amount that they want. But once you add that token in your code, you're going to actually see this randomly generated token, which then is going to be your unique ID, which is going to keep you safe in this scenario. So anything else to add to that or close out there?
So just to close out, we are thinking like attackers to build better defense. I just wanted to emphasize that. This does take practice, so I encourage you to look at some of these online resources that are completely free to use. Google Creator, DBWA, just anything that you can find online is, as long as it's emphasizing that you're building your own server, it's a really good tutorial, and I just know that DBWA, Google Creator, things like that, have you build your own server, so it makes it legal, and remember, doing this for defense.
So kind of to wrap up the presentation here, I think one thing to note is, some of the attacks that Christine showed really aren't that complicated, right? A lot of it you can find in Google. They're pretty reasonably easy codes to execute. So hackers have all of this, right? But then also the fix, maybe not so much with the Heartbleed, but in general are sometimes easy fixes as well. They are something that you could have done in the code to have prevented it in the first place, or keeping up with your patch management or vulnerability management to have prevented it. So kind of taking a broader look into how do you stay ahead of some of these vulnerabilities, right, and without being so reactive to it. And kind of two of the things is making sure that you're embedding security as part of your software system development lifecycle. And not just security, we also now recommend privacy as piece of it. So what that simply means is that as you're going through the different steps in a development lifecycle, you're considering security. And it's a question, it's a checkpoint as you go through. And that could be, waterfall model, it could be agile, now we have DevOps. It doesn't matter quite which type of SDLC you're using, it's just making sure that for that you're building the right appropriate checks for it. And then the second piece of it is making sure that your application owners, your business owners, your developers, your administrators are trained on security, right? The security that they need for their job. So you don't want to kind of give them a whole course on it, but if you're a developer, focus on the coding piece of it and make sure that they're understanding what are some of those checks and bounds that they can do to prevent it. In this example here, what we call security by design, what I just explained, kind of having security throughout the process, starting off, you want to make sure when you're having these development meetings or working with your architecture, you also have a security architect within those discussions, right? Making sure how you're designing that application doesn't have any critical flaw in it from the get-go, or the data that you're trying to collect is being collected in the right way that you're considering throughout the process. As you go through then and you're developing, you want to make sure that the code goes through code scans and code reviews, right? So if there are security flaws there, there's a checkpoint to make sure that you're fixing it and you're risk ranking, right? So some things, it may be okay to have it for the time being and you fix it later. Some are critical and you cannot go past that gate until you fix it. And then at the end, just making sure the maintenance piece of it, once a web application is in production, you are doing periodic vulnerability tests on it to make sure that nothing changed or nothing went out of date and you're still kind of secure and protected from that perspective. Anything else to add there?
That's it.
Okay. So I think we're done with our presentation. We have like 2 or 3 minutes for Q&A, I want to say.
So you can take like 1 or 2 questions if anyone has any questions. Yeah.
Back to the Heartbleed. Is that something, so that's something that hasn't really been corrected? Like Windows hasn't sent out an update that corrects that, so that can still kind of like happen now?
It depends on, so they developed a patch for it, but it's dependent on the users and the server owners to update their server and to actually apply the patch. So they have corrected it, but they can't force everybody to update their server. So what Sukie was pointing out is that there's so many people that haven't updated their servers, and maybe it's they just don't know, or maybe that it's too expensive. That's one of the biggest problems with cybersecurity. It's not only like an arms race, like create an attack, create a patch, create an attack, create a patch, but it's also get all those people that are using the service to actually apply the patch and take the time to update their server. So it's been fixed, but I can choose to use this server to run my website if I want.
Yeah. So but if somebody has fixed it, it's fixed for that website. So it's not like they're going to be impacted by it, right? So if, like, Google is no longer vulnerable to it, but like some mom and pop shop's website could be. Right? So it's not like it's not like it's there like because one person didn't fix it, everyone's now affected. It's whoever didn't fix it is affected, right? So there's pockets of those 200,000 services.
So as a user, you kind of have no idea.
Right. Yeah. So, but I mean, I would say, or I would like to think, all of the big companies have gone ahead and done their best to address them, right? But if you literally Google like Heartbleed like detection tool or something, you can find a tool, and if a site looks kind of shady, you enter the URL and tell you if it's impacted by it still. So you could do that.
Okay, so we are just about out of time. Has anyone not put their thing in? Okay. Okay.
Maybe while we're putting them in, we can take more questions.
Yeah.
Maybe one.
Okay.
So, I know you guys were mentioning cloud data and PDA, and I know that, well, just me personally, I've had questions about how you can secure your cloud data if you have your own personal cloud or if you're protecting your personal cloud, and what ways that companies that are integrating to clouds can secure their own data, not just from attackers, but also in like the legal ramifications that people are starting to be concerned about, since all of your data storage is being pushed to the cloud, can the government or like police officials, you seize that data and then use it against you, or any of your clients that use your data?
So I mean, typically at least from a company perspective, a lot of them are going to be private clouds or worked in a way that not the world can access them, right? And a lot of, because of the regulations and requirements, companies like Amazon, so AWS, they're compliant with a lot of the regulations already, right? To be able to do business and give their customers assurance that at least the infrastructure is meeting the requirements. Now, what companies need to realize is if you put data on top of it or applications on top of it, you're sort of responsible for that. So if you do have sensitive data, I think the best way is really to encrypt that data. I mean, that's like one of the, it's definitely not easy, but one of the ideal ways to protect your data, especially if it's like PII data.
Right, so if you were in a type of situation, or even if you were just holding onto data that you know someone in a case may be like vulnerable to, and like someone tries to seize it, what could you do with your specific data where you can have it out of reach of those type of situations? Or is there a way around that, or do you just have to give it up?
I mean, I think from a personal standpoint, I would say like making sure you have the right like access controls, I guess, like making sure nobody else can get to it, right? To the best that you can. Like I'm gonna assume you're not gonna like instance your data, but then if you're not sure if your data is gonna be secure there, I guess don't put it there, right? I mean, understand like if you're gonna take the risk, is it worth the risk or not?
Yeah, some people just don't use Dropbox. They don't trust it, or they don't use their accounts. They don't trust it.
Or like
would you know if you got in a situation like with the Apple situation where the government was trying to seize them and try to get them to, basically hack other people's phones because they wanted the information? How do you know, like, you don't know if the company's gonna back you up or not. So like, what can you do on a personal stance?
You don't.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, like, don't give the government a reason to
Yeah.
chase you.
So like if I'm using like, I was trying to transfer something to my family in Switzerland using Dropbox, right? To send them some personal information. So I used like at that time TrueCrypt. It's no longer actually secure, but I think there's some other ones, Beranek or something. So I actually like encrypted the data through that, gave them the password over phone, and so they could do it that way. So there are commonly available tools to do that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So we definitely need to wrap it up.